The great dome of the Galactic Council chamber rose high above the marble floors of Velrose Prime. Today, the chamber filled with fear. Representatives from across the galaxy sat in their floating seats, their many different faces showing worry and panic. The air buzzed with nervous energy as creatures with scales, fur, and crystal skin whispered to each other in dozens of languages. Ambassador Thixira stood at the center of the chamber. Her 4 purple arms shook as she held the control device. She was tall and thin like most Valrosians, with large black eyes that now filled with tears. Behind her, a massive hologram showed pictures that made the entire chamber fall silent. Dead worlds, burned planets, empty space, where star systems used to be. Honored council members, Thixira began, her voice breaking. Awakened, a wave of gasps and frightened sounds filled the chamber. Even the bravest warriors among them knew that name. The Void Swarm was an old story, a nightmare from the dark times when the galaxy was young. Ancient machines that ate everything in their path, growing stronger with each world they destroyed. 3 weeks ago, our deep space sensors detected movement at the galaxy's edge, Thixira continued. She pressed a button, and the hologram changed to show a fleet of dark ships. They looked wrong somehow, like they were made from the bones of dead stars. The swarm has consumed 12 systems already. Billions of lives gone. Council Speaker Morden, a massive creature with thick gray skin and tusks, leaned forward in his chair. How fast are they moving? Too fast, Thixira replied. Our scientists say they will reach the core worlds in 6 months. Maybe less. She paused, looking around the chamber. We need help. The Velrosian Republic cannot fight this alone. The chamber erupted in noise. Representatives shouted in there, native languages arguing and panicking. Some stood up and waved their arms or tentacles. Others huddled together, planning in whispers. Morden banged his stone hammer on the speaker's desk. The sound echoed through the dome, and slowly the noise died down. Order! We will have order, he shouted. The chair recognizes Ambassador Kethver of the Alterian Empire. A tall, elegant creature with golden skin and no hair stood up. His clothes sparkled with jewels, and his voice was smooth like expensive wine. The Alterian Empire sympathizes with our Valrosian friends, he said, but his tone was cold. However, we have commitments in the Outer Rim. Our fleets are busy keeping peace in the mining worlds. We cannot spare ships for this. Unfortunate situation. Angry voices rose from the Valrosian section. His face turned darker purple. Unfortunate situation, she repeated. This is the end of everything we know. Kethver shrugged, a gesture. That looked strange with his long, thin arms. The Empire has responsibilities to its citizens first. We suggest the Velrosians speak with other powers. The chair recognizes Speaker Zillanoth of the Crystalline Collective, Morden announced. A being made of living crystals stood up. Light moved through her body like trapped rainbows, and her voice sounded like wind chimes. The collective has. Run the numbers, she said in her musical voice. Our war forms are not designed for this type of conflict. The Void Swarm adapts too quickly. Any force we send would likely be consumed and turned against us. So you refuse to help as well? Thixira asked, her voice getting louder. We do not refuse. We simply state facts. Our death would not save your people. More arguing filled the chamber. Representatives from smaller worlds stood up to speak, but they all said the same thing. They were too weak, too far away, or too busy with their own problems. The Nebula Federation's representative, a floating jellyfish-like creature, didn't even bother to give an excuse. The Federation will not risk our ships, it said simply. Hours passed. The sun outside the dome moved across the sky as representative after representative found reasons to avoid helping. Some were honest about their fear. Others made up complicated political reasons. Few simply said no and sat back down. Thixira watched her people's last hope die with each refusal. The Velrosian Republic was strong, but not strong enough to fight the Void Swarm alone. No single power was. They needed the combined fleets of the galaxy, but fear and politics made unity impossible. Perhaps, said a small voice from the back. "We should consider other options." The chamber turned to look at the speaker. It was Dalinek, a young aide from the Cultural Exchange Department. He was nervous, his scaled hand shaking as hundreds of eyes focused on him. "What other options?" Morden asked, sounding tired and annoyed. Dalinek swallowed hard. "Well, sir, there are the new species. The ones from the small systems. Maybe one of them could help." Several representatives laughed. The sound was not kind. "The baby civilizations?" Kethver asked with a smirk. "What could they possibly do? That we cannot?" "There are the humans," Dalinek said quietly. The laughter got louder. Even Nexera looked confused. "Humans? Who are they?" Dalinek pulled out a small datapad and read from it. They come from a system called Sol. They've been traveling in space for about 300 years. Their largest ships are about the size of our escort vessels. 300 years? Zelenoth's crystal body flashed with colors that meant amusement. "My people have been spacefaring for 50,000 years. What could these infants teach us?" "They use fusion power," Dalinek continued, reading from his notes. "Their weapons are basic kinetic projectiles and simple energy beams. Their ships can't even travel faster than light very well." The laughter was so loud now that Dalinek had to wait for it to stop. "This is ridiculous," Kethper said, wiping tears from his golden eyes. "We're talking about asking Stone Age barbarians to save the galaxy." But Dexira wasn't laughing. She was desperate, and desperate people consider options that others won't. "How many ships do they have?" she asked. Dalinek looked surprised that someone was taking him seriously. According to our last report, about 100 combat vessels. Most are very small." 100 ships, Morden repeated slowly. "The Alterian Empire has 10,000. The Crystalline Collective has 5,000. And we're discussing asking a species with 100 tiny ships to save us? Do we have any other choices?" Dexira asked. Her voice was quiet now, tired from hours of begging for help that wouldn't come. "Everyone else has said no, please. The humans might say yes." The chamber fell silent. The truth of her words hung in the air like a bad smell. The mighty powers of the galaxy, with all their advanced technology and massive fleets, were too afraid or too selfish to act. Maybe primitive courage was better than advanced cowardice. Morden sighed, a sound like rocks falling down a mountain. "Very well. Send the distress signal to this ... Sol system, though I doubt they'll even understand it." The session ended, and representatives filed out of the chamber. None of them expected much from the humans. They were asking for help from a species that barely knew how to travel between stars. What could possibly go wrong with that plan? In the empty chamber, Agizera stood alone, looking up at the dome above. Somewhere out there, the void swarm was getting closer. And somewhere else, in a The Kelran system was dying. What used to be a beautiful collection of 7 planets was now a graveyard of metal and ash. The Void Swarm had arrived 3 days ago, and already the outer worlds were gone. Massive black ships, each one the size of a city, moved slowly through space like hungry sharks. On the observation station, hidden behind Kelran's largest moon, alien scientists watched the destruction with growing horror. The station belonged to the Galactic Council, built to study the Void Swarm from a safe distance. Inside, creatures from a dozen different worlds stared at their screens and tried to understand what they were seeing. "The consumption rate is increasing," reported Zeekmer, a tall being with tentacles instead of arms. His voice shook as he read the numbers. "They've harvested 60% of the 4th planet's mass in just 8 hours. Dr. Veltash, the station's chief scientist, floated in her tank of blue liquid. Her fish-like body moved nervously as she processed the data. "The energy readings don't make sense. They're converting matter to energy at impossible efficiency rates." On the main screen, they watched the Void Swarm work. The black ships shot beams at the planet below, breaking apart mountains and oceans. Smaller machines, each one the size of a building, crawled across the surface like metal ants. Everything they touched turned into more machines. The planet was being eaten alive. "New contact," shouted LT. Nixara from the sensor station. She was young for a scientist, with purple skin and large eyes that now filled with confusion. "Reading ships approaching the system, but the signatures are ... strange." Dr. Veltash turned her attention to the new readings. "Strange how? They're small, really small. The largest one reads is barely a kilometer long. They're using primitive fusion drives." The other scientists gathered around the sensor display. After watching city-sized Void Swarm ships, these new contacts looked like toys. There were about 100 of them moving in neat formations toward the system. Who would be foolish enough to attack with such tiny ships? Zeekmer wondered aloud. "Checking the registry, LT," Nixara said, typing quickly on her console. Oh no, these are human ships." A moment of silence filled the station. Then Dr. Veltash made a sound like bubbling water, which was how her species laughed. "The humans? Those primitive beings from the Sol system? This is madness." "Should we warn them to retreat?" asked Zeekmer. "Let them learn," Dr. Veltash replied coldly. "Perhaps their destruction will provide useful data about Void Swarm combat tactics." In the human fleet, Bronwu stood on the bridge of the Inchin and watched the Kelran system grow larger on his screens. The sight made his stomach turn. He could see the black ships of the Void Swarm moving through space like a disease. Even from this distance, their size was frightening. Admiral called LT Amencio from communications. "We're receiving a transmission from a Galactic Council observation post. They're telling us to retreat immediately." "Let me guess," said Captain Kim Tae-hyun, who had joined Lee on the bridge. "They think we're about to get ourselves killed," probably Lee admitted. "Dr. Park, what do our scans tell us about the enemy?" Dr. Park Saw-young looked up from her science station. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "The Void Swarm. Ships are massive, Admiral. Their hulls appear to be made of some kind of self-repairing metal. Energy readings suggest weapons far beyond our technology. How many ships are we facing?" 43 large vessels plus thousands of smaller support craft. They outmass our entire fleet by about 50 to 1. Captain Kim whistled softly. "Those aren't good odds." "No," Lee agreed. "They're not, but we didn't come here to run away." He turned to the tactical station. "Captain Cho, take your destroyer group and probe their defenses. See what we're really dealing with." Captain Cho Minho commanded the destroyer Busan, one of Earth's newest and fastest ships. He was known throughout the fleet for his aggressive tactics and quick thinking. When he received his orders, he grinned. "Finally, some action. All ships form up on me. We're going to poke the bear." The human destroyers moved forward in a formation. That looked strange to anyone watching. Instead of the straight lines that most space navies used, the human ships moved in a three-dimensional pattern, constantly changing position relative to each other. On the observation station, the alien scientists watched in confusion. What are they doing? Nixara asked. Their formation makes no tactical sense. Perhaps they don't understand space combat, suggested Ziegmer. Most species take centuries to develop proper orbital mechanics. We're about to learn how wrong they were. The Void Swarm detected the approaching human ships and responded, as they always did. 10 of their smaller vessels, each one still larger than a human destroyer, moved to intercept. They flew in perfect straight lines, using the gravity of nearby planets to slingshot themselves forward. Void Swarm ships incoming, reported the sensor officer on the Busan. 10 contacts, moving fast. I see them, Captain Cho replied calmly. All ships, execute pattern Delta. Show them what human pilots can do. What happened next made the alien observers question everything they knew about space combat. The human ships suddenly broke formation and began moving in ways that shouldn't have been possible. They turned sharply, accelerated at right angles to their previous course, and danced through space like fighter jets in an atmosphere. Impossible. Dr. Veltash gasped, her gills flapping in agitation. They're maneuvering as if they're flying in water, not vacuum. The Void Swarm ships, programmed for conventional space tactics, couldn't adapt fast enough. Their targeting systems were designed to predict where enemy ships would be based on orbital mechanics. But the human ships weren't following orbital mechanics. They were flying like submarines in a three-dimensional ocean. Captain Cho's destroyer dove below the enemy formation, then suddenly reversed course and climbed above them. His weapons officer, LT Park Jun-sik, opened fire with the ship's railguns. The metal projectiles, moving at incredible speed, punched through the Void Swarm ship's hull like bullets through paper. Direct hit, LT Park shouted. Their armor is strong, but not against kinetic impact at these velocities. The other human destroyers followed suit, dancing around the confused Void Swarm ships and hitting them from unexpected angles. Within minutes, 3 enemy vessels were disabled, their dark hulls cracked in bleeding atmosphere. On the observation station, the alien scientists stared in shock. How are they doing this? Ziegmer whispered. Dr. Park So-young, monitoring the battle from the Incheon, smiled grimly. Admiral, the aliens are learning something important about humans. We didn't evolve in space. We evolved on a planet with gravity, weather, and three-dimensional terrain. Our brains are wired for this kind of movement. While other species think in terms of orbits and trajectories, Admiral Lee added, we think in terms of hunting and being hunted. We learn to fly by watching birds, not by calculating gravity wells. The battle continued, but the outcome was becoming clear. The Void Swarm ships were powerful, but predictable. They had conquered dozens of civilizations by overwhelming them with size and firepower. They had never faced an enemy that fought like humans. But the real surprise was yet to come. Deep in the Incheon's cargo bay, Engineer Sergeant Kong Jin-ae was preparing humanity's secret weapon. She was a small woman with grease-stained coveralls and hands that never stopped moving. For the past 5 years, she had worked on Earth's most classified project. Admiral, she called over the COM system requesting permission to deploy the nanobots. The observation station LT, Nixara detected something new. I'm reading small objects launching from the human flagship. Thousands of them. They're too small to be missiles. Debris, suggested Ziegmer. They're moving under their own power, and they're heading straight for the Void Swarm ships. The tiny objects were nanobots, machines so small they were almost invisible. But these weren't ordinary nanobots. Engineers had spent decades studying the few alien technologies they could find, learning how to build machines that could think and adapt. The nanobots reached the first Void Swarm vessel and immediately began their work. They slipped through microscopic gaps in the hull and found the ship's computer systems. Within seconds, they had accessed the enemy's networks and begun copying their code. What's happening to the enemy ships? Dr. Veltash asked in growing. Alarm. Their energy signatures are fluctuating. On the Void Swarm vessels, chaos was spreading. The nanobots had done something impossible. They had turned the enemy's own technology against them. Computer systems that had worked perfectly for thousands of years suddenly began making mistakes. Weapons fired at the wrong targets. Navigation systems sent ships in the wrong directions. Impossible, Dr. Veltosh breathed. They're using our greatest fear against the Void Swarm. Self-replicating machines fighting self-replicating machines. Largest Void Swarm ship in the system suddenly turned and fired its main weapon at one of its own support vessels. Then another enemy ship did the same thing. Within minutes, the entire Void Swarm force was shooting at each other in complete confusion. Admiral Lee watched the chaos with satisfaction. Signal all ships, he ordered. Phase 1 complete. Prepare for full assault. The alien